I never expected that a broken heart would be the thing that dismantled my life, especially when it was not even my own. My life was a structure of careful design, a grid of quiet routines and self-imposed boundaries. I was a graphic designer, and my world, both on-screen and off, was governed by alignment, negative space, and the comfort of knowing precisely where everything belonged. My apartment was a testament to this philosophy. Books were arranged by spine color, coffee mugs hung in a perfect row, and the silence was a soft, predictable hum. It was a fortress of order, and I was its lonely, vigilant king. Then there was Julian. Julian was the beautiful, chaotic variable in my otherwise static equation. He was my roommate, my best friend, and the keeper of a gravity I found myself helplessly orbiting. He was an architect, but he had the soul and the build of a man who worked with his hands. He was tall, with shoulders that seemed to carry the weight of the world with an effortless grace. His presence filled a room, not with noise, but with a steady, grounding energy that my own anxious frequency always tried to sync with. He was a low, rumbling laugh that vibrated through the floorboards, the scent of sawdust and fresh soap that clung to his flannel shirts, the dark curl of his hair when it was damp from the shower. He was, in my carefully curated internal museum, the main exhibit, the one I studied daily from behind the velvet rope of our friendship. And he was, as far as I knew, completely and unshakably straight. This was the primary barrier, the great dividing wall that kept my feelings contained. He spoke of women with an easy, appreciative warmth, of Sarah, his girlfriend of 3 years, in particular. He would talk about their future, a house he wanted to design for them, a dog they might get. Each word was a small, sharp pinprick to the fragile bubble of hope I did not even allow myself to acknowledge I was holding. Losing his friendship was unthinkable. It was the central pillar supporting the fragile architecture of my social life. So I became an expert in observation without attachment, a scholar of platonic affection. I learned the precise pressure of a friendly slap on the back, the exact duration a shared glance could last before it became something else. I cataloged his habits, the way he chewed on the end of a pencil when sketching, the specific sigh he made when he was tired, the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he genuinely smiled. My admiration was a quiet, secret thing, a collection of moments stored away in the climate-controlled archives of my mind. It was a constant, low-grade ache in my chest, a yearning that had become such a part of me that I barely noticed it anymore, like the hum of the refrigerator or the distant sound of city traffic. It was just the background noise of my life. My routine was my armor against it. I would wake, work, eat, and sleep. I would listen to his stories about Sarah, offer the right supportive noises, and then retreat to the safety of my room, where the silence was mine to control. He was the sun, and I was a planet content with my distant, predictable orbit, terrified of what would happen if I ever drifted closer and burned. The day the structure crumbled began like any other. It was a Tuesday in October, the kind of day where the sky was a flat, indifferent gray. I was finalizing a logo design, lost in the minute adjustments of kerning and color balance. The front door opened and closed, but it was the sound that followed that made me freeze. It was not Julian's usual heavy tread, the thump of his work boots on the hardwood floor. It was a slow, dragging shuffle, followed by the soft clink of keys being dropped, not placed, on the small entryway table. Then, a silence so profound it felt louder than any sound. I pushed my chair back, my own carefully constructed piece suddenly feeling thin and fragile. I walked into the living room and found him standing there, his back to me, staring at the window. He was still wearing his jacket. He had not moved to turn on a light, and the room was sinking into the early evening gloom. The air felt heavy, charged with a static I did not understand. "Jules?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. He did not turn around for a long moment. When he finally did, his face was a ruin. His eyes, usually so bright and alive, were hollowed out, shadowed with a grief so raw it was like a physical wound. He looked utterly lost, like a man who had woken up in a foreign country with no memory of how he got there. "It's over," he said. His voice was a rasp, a dry whisper of its usual warm rumble. "Sarah and I, it's over." The words hung in the air, displacing all the oxygen. My first instinct, a selfish and shameful one, was a flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. It was a vile, ugly little spark, and I stamped it out immediately, my mind flooding with guilt. My friend was breaking in front of me. That was all that mattered. He finally moved, slumping onto the sofa with the boneless collapse of a marionette whose strings had been cut. He dropped his head into his hands, and his broad shoulders, the ones I had always seen as impossibly strong, began to shake. He did not make a sound, but the silent, violent tremors of his weeping were more devastating than any cry. The established boundaries of our friendship, the easy banter, the comfortable distance, evaporated in that moment. He was not the confident, self-assured man I kept at a safe distance. He was just a person in immense pain, and he was 3 feet away from me. My own carefully ordered world tilted on its axis. The fortress walls were breached, not by an invading army, but by the quiet, desperate sorrow of the one person I would do anything to protect. My routines, my rules, my safe spaces, they all felt like meaningless lines drawn in the sand against this rising tide of his grief. I did not know what to do. The manual for this situation did not exist. So I did the only thing that felt real. I sat down on the coffee table in front of him, leaned forward, and placed a hand on his knee. The contact felt electric, a jolt of warmth through the thick denim of his jeans. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like crossing a line I had sworn to myself I would never approach. He did not pull away. He did not even seem to notice. He just continued to shudder in the growing darkness, and I just kept my hand there, a silent, inadequate anchor in the storm that had just broken over our home. The days that followed blurred into a new, chaotic routine. Julian did not go to work. He barely left the couch. Our apartment, once a space of comfortable coexistence with clearly demarcated zones, shrank until it felt like we were living in a single, grief-soaked room. His presence was a constant, heavy weight. He would sleep on the couch, wrapped in an old quilt, and I would hear his fitful, murmuring breaths from my bedroom down the hall. The sound was a constant reminder of his proximity, a low, unsteady rhythm that worked its way into my own dreams. My world became hyper-focused, a sensory overload centered entirely on him. I became acutely aware of the scent of him in the living room. No longer the clean, sharp smell of soap and sawdust, but something more intimate and raw. It was the scent of stale sleep, of unwashed linen, and underneath it all, the faint, warm, musky scent of his skin. It permeated the sofa cushions, the throw blankets, the very air I was breathing. It felt invasive and intoxicating all at once. I would make coffee in the morning, the familiar aroma a weak defense against the overwhelming smell of him. My carefully guarded personal space was gone. I would navigate around him to get to the kitchen, the warmth radiating from his sleeping form a tangible field of energy I had to pass through. Sometimes, my knee would brush the arm of the sofa, and the brief contact would send a jolt through my entire system. He was a sun I was no longer orbiting from a safe distance. His gravity had pulled me in, and the heat was becoming unbearable. Our interactions were small, fragmented, and loaded with a significance that made my chest tight. I would leave a glass of water on the end table for him. He would murmur a thanks without looking up. I would make soup, something simple and warm, and he would eat a few spoonfuls in silence before pushing the bowl away. We did not talk about Sarah. We did not talk about what happened. We existed in a state of shared, silent crisis. One evening, about a week after it happened, I found him staring at a blank television screen, his face illuminated by the faint blue light. He looked thinner, his usual energy leached out of him, leaving behind a fragile, hollowed-out version of the man I knew. I sat on the arm of the chair opposite him, maintaining a careful distance. For a long time, neither of us spoke. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the distant wail of a siren. "I thought I had it all planned out," he said suddenly, his voice raspy from disuse. He was still looking at the screen, at the reflection of the darkroom. The house, the career, her. It was all a blueprint. Perfect lines, right angles. All the measurements were correct. He finally turned his head and looked at me. The vulnerability in his eyes was a physical blow. The confident facade he presented to the world was gone, stripped away to reveal something terrified and uncertain underneath. "What do you do when you realize you built the whole thing on a faulty foundation, Leo?" he asked. The whole structure is compromised. You have to just tear it down. It was the first time he had shown me this side of himself. Not just sadness, but a profound and existential fear. The man who designed buildings, who understood structure and stability better than anyone, was admitting his own life was collapsing. My heart ached for him, a fierce, protective pang that transcended my own selfish yearning. My love for him, which had been a quiet, aesthetic admiration for the finished sculpture, was transforming into a desperate need to shield the fragile clay from cracking. "You don't tear it down," I said, the words coming out before I had time to vet them through my usual anxious filter. "You reinforce it. You find the weak points and you make them stronger." He held my gaze for a long moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his exhausted eyes. Then he gave a small, humorless laugh and looked away, breaking the connection. "I don't even know where the weak points are anymore," he whispered. "I think it's all weak." The conversation ended there, but it left a crack in the wall between us. He had let me see his fear, and in doing so, had inadvertently invited me deeper into his chaos. The dynamic had shifted permanently. I was no longer just the observer. I was part of the wreckage, and the charged, tense air of our shared space was becoming denser with every passing hour. Each small kindness, each shared silence, felt like we were piling sandbags against a flood, knowing it was only a matter of time before the water broke through. The breaking point came on a Thursday. A storm had rolled in during the afternoon, a furious, lashing rain that beat against the windows and rattled the old frames of our building. The sky was a bruised purple-gray, and the world outside seemed to have dissolved into a churning torrent of wind and water. Inside, the apartment felt like a small, dimly lit lifeboat adrift on a dark sea. I had put on some quiet music, and we had eaten dinner, a pizza I had ordered, in near silence, the sound of the storm a constant, roaring companion. Later, I was in my room, trying to read, but the words on the page were just black marks. My mind was in the other room, with him. I could hear the faint murmur of the television he had left on, a meaningless drone beneath the symphony of the storm. Around midnight, the sound of the television clicked off. I heard the rustle of him settling into the quilt on the couch, the familiar sigh of him trying to find a comfortable position. I turned off my own light, plunging my room into darkness, and tried to will myself to sleep. But sleep would not come. My senses were stretched thin, listening for his breathing, for any sign of distress. The rain hammered against the glass, a frantic, percussive rhythm that echoed the pounding in my own chest. An hour passed, then another. I was drifting in that hazy space between wakefulness and sleep when a new sound cut through the noise of the storm. A soft, choked gasp from the living room. I was instantly wide awake, my heart seizing. I lay perfectly still, straining to hear. It came again, a desperate, hitched breath, the sound of someone fighting for air in a dream. A nightmare. I threw back my covers and moved silently out of my room. The only light was the pale, watery glow from the streetlights filtering through the rain-streaked windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the living room. I could see his form on the couch, a huddled shape under the quilt. He was twisting, his legs tangled in the fabric, his hands clenched into fists near his face. He let out another pained whimper, and a primal, protective instinct I did not know I possessed took over. I crossed the room and knelt by the side of the couch. "Julian," I whispered, my voice tight. "Jules, wake up." I reached out and put a hand on his shoulder. His skin was hot and damp through the thin fabric of his t-shirt. He flinched violently at my touch, his eyes flying open. They were wide and wild with sleep terror, unfocused. He stared right through me for a horrifying second before recognition slowly dawned in them. The panic subsided, replaced by a deep, shuddering exhaustion. "Leo," he breathed, his voice thick with sleep and fear. "You were dreaming," I said softly. He nodded, running a shaky hand over his face. He did not move away from my touch. My hand was still on his shoulder, the warmth of his skin a powerful current flowing directly into my palm. He leaned into it, just slightly, a subtle shift of weight that felt monumental. "It's the damn couch," he mumbled, his voice hoarse. "I can't. I keep having the same dream." He closed his eyes, a pained expression flickering across his features. "I'm in the house, the one I designed for us. But it's empty, and the walls are all crumbling into dust. My heart broke for him. I squeezed his shoulder gently. It was just a dream. He was quiet for a long time, his breathing slowly evening out, becoming deeper. The rain continued its relentless assault on the windows. I should have moved. I should have taken my hand back, stood up, and returned to the safety of my own room. But I was frozen, mesmerized by the intimacy of the moment, the darkness, the storm, the raw vulnerability of the man beside me. "Can I?" he started, then stopped. His voice was so low I barely heard it over the rain. "This is going to sound crazy. What is it? Can I just stay in your room tonight?" he asked, the words a quiet rush. "Not in the bed. On the floor. Anywhere. I don't want to be alone out here." The request hit me with the force of a physical blow. It was everything I had secretly wanted and everything I was terrified of. It was a complete obliteration of the last remaining boundary between us. My mind screamed at me to say no, to protect myself, to preserve the fragile peace. But my heart, that traitorous, foolish organ, had already made the decision. "Don't be an idiot," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady. "You're not sleeping on the floor." I stood up, finally removing my hand, the loss of contact leaving my palm feeling cold and empty. I did not wait for his response. I walked back to my room, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. I pulled back the covers on the other side of my queen-sized bed, the side that had been empty for as long as I could remember. I turned and saw him standing in the doorway, a silhouette against the dim light of the hall, looking uncertain and impossibly fragile. "It's fine," I said, my voice softer now. "Come on." He moved into the room and slid into the bed, keeping as close to the edge as possible, as if afraid to take up any more space than was absolutely necessary. I got back in on my side. The space between us felt like a mile-wide canyon of charged, humming air. I lay on my back, staring up at the dark ceiling, my entire body rigid. I could hear his breathing, feel the subtle dip his weight made in the mattress. It was an intimacy so profound it was almost painful. We lay in silence for what felt like an eternity, two separate islands in the same small sea. The storm outside began to subside, the frantic drumming of the rain softening to a steady, rhythmic patter. I thought he had fallen asleep. I was just starting to allow my own tense muscles to relax when I felt him shift. He turned over, his body facing me. I did not move, did not breathe. I could feel the warmth of him reaching across the space between us. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. Then, slowly, tentatively, his hand moved across the sheet until his fingers brushed against mine. It was not an accident. It was a question, a soft, hesitant inquiry in the dark. My own fingers, of their own volition, curled around his. His hand was large and warm and strong, and it enveloped mine completely. A shudder went through me, a current of pure, terrifying electricity. This was it, the point of no return. He shifted again, moving closer until his shoulder was brushing against mine. I could feel the heat of his body all along my side. I finally found the courage to turn my head on the pillow. In the faint light, I could just make out the shape of his face, his eyes open and fixed on me. Neither of us spoke. There were no words for this. There was only the sound of the rain, the sound of our breathing, and the feeling of his hand holding mine. He moved his other hand, lifting it to my face. His calloused fingertips traced the line of my jaw with an impossible gentleness, a touch that was both a discovery and a benediction. And then he leaned in. His lips met mine with a soft, questioning pressure. It was not a kiss of passion, but one of profound, heartbreaking tenderness. It was hesitant, uncertain, and it asked a million questions without a single word. My carefully constructed world did not just tilt. It dissolved into nothingness, replaced by this single, overwhelming sensation. The taste of him, the warmth of his breath, the soft scratch of his stubble against my skin. I kissed him back. It was a surrender, a confession, the crumbling of every wall I had ever built. The kiss deepened, still slow, still gentle, but with a new certainty, a sense of recognition, as if we had both just found something we had been searching for our entire lives without even knowing it. My ordered life was over. This was chaos, and it was the most beautiful, terrifying, and perfect thing I had ever known. The morning after was a masterpiece of agonizing silence. I woke up first, disoriented, to the pale gray light of dawn filtering through my window. For a blissful, fleeting second, I had no memory of the night before. Then it all came rushing back. The storm, the nightmare, his hand in mine, the impossible softness of his lips. A wave of heat washed over me, a mixture of giddy disbelief and stomach-churning terror. I turned my head slowly. The other side of the bed was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, seized me. I sat up, my heart hammering. The quilt was neatly folded at the foot of the bed. There was no sign he had ever been there, except for the faint indentation on the pillow next to mine and the lingering scent of his skin that clung to the sheets. I got out of bed, my movements stiff and robotic. I pulled on a pair of sweatpants and walked into the living room. He was there, in the kitchen, his back to me. He was making coffee, the familiar morning ritual, now feeling alien and menacing. He moved with a strange, rigid formality, his shoulders tense. He had not heard me. "Morning," I said, and the word came out as a croak. He flinched, a barely perceptible tightening of his muscles. He did not turn around. "Morning," he replied, his voice flat and distant. It was the voice he used with clients on the phone, a polite, professional tone that held a universe of distance. It was not the voice of my friend. It was not the voice of the man who had kissed me hours before. He poured coffee into his mug and, still without looking at me, walked past me and went straight to his own room, closing the door softly behind him. The click of the latch was like a gunshot in the silent apartment. I stood alone in the kitchen, the aroma of coffee filling the air, feeling colder than I had ever felt in my life. The anxiety that had been a low hum in the background of my life for years roared to life, a deafening siren in my head. It was a mistake. The thought was a relentless, punishing mantra. He was grieving. He was vulnerable. He was half asleep and seeking comfort, any comfort. And I, in my pathetic, selfish desperation, had let him. I had taken advantage of his pain. I had misinterpreted a moment of human connection for something it was never meant to be. The kiss had not been a beginning. It had been a transgression. My mind became a torture chamber, replaying every second of the night before. I dissected every touch, every glance, every breath, searching for evidence to support my rising panic. His hesitation was not tenderness, it was reluctance. The gentleness of the kiss was not affection, it was a lack of passion. His retreat to the edge of the bed was not about giving me space, it was about his own discomfort. I had ruined everything. I had taken our friendship, the most stable and important relationship in my life, and shattered it with my own unspoken, unwanted desires. The easy camaraderie, the comfortable silences, the shared jokes, it was all gone, replaced by this thick, suffocating awkwardness. He could not even look at me. The silence from behind his closed door was an accusation. The rest of the day was an exercise in mutual avoidance. I heard him shower and leave for work, the front door closing with a quiet finality. He sent a single text message a few hours later. "Going to be working late tonight. Don't wait up." The words were functional, devoid of any warmth. Each one was another brick in the wall he was clearly building between us. I spent the day in a fog of self-loathing. I could not work. I paced the apartment, the space now feeling cavernous and hostile. Every object reminded me of him. His jacket slung over a chair, his sketchbook left on the coffee table, the empty space on the couch where he had slept for a week. The ghost of his presence was everywhere, a constant, painful reminder of what I had lost. The emotional chasm between us felt wider and more impassable than the physical distance ever had. Before, there was a wall I had built. Now, there was a ruin, and I was the one who had set the demolition charge. By evening, I had worked myself into a state of resigned despair. There was only one solution. I had to leave. I could not subject him to this, to the daily awkwardness of living with the person who had violated his trust. I could find a new apartment. It would be difficult, but it was the only way to salvage what little might be left of our friendship. If I removed myself from the equation, maybe, in time, he could forgive me. Maybe we could go back to being friends, albeit friends who lived in different parts of the city. I started packing a bag, my movements jerky and numb. I threw in some clothes, a toothbrush, my laptop. I did not know where I was going, a hotel, maybe, but I knew I could not spend another night under the same roof. The thought of him coming home and having to face me again was unbearable. I was a problem that needed to be removed. I was zipping the duffel bag closed when I heard the key in the front door. My blood ran cold. He was home, earlier than he had said. I froze, my hands still on the bag, bracing myself for the inevitable, painful confrontation. He walked into the living room and stopped dead when he saw me, my packed bag sitting on the floor between us like an unexploded bomb. He looked exhausted. There were dark circles under his eyes, and his face was pale. He looked from the bag to my face, his expression unreadable. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice quiet. "I'm leaving," I said, my own voice trembling slightly. "I think it's for the best. I'll find a place. I'll be out of your way in a few days. I'm sorry, Julian. For last night. I'm so sorry." He just stared at me for a long moment, his brow furrowed. He looked confused, and then a wave of something that looked like pain washed over his features. He took a step closer, then another. "Leo," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Stop. We need to talk." My heart sank to the floor. This was it. The rejection speech. The gentle letdown. I value our friendship too much for this to get weird conversation. I braced myself, steeling my nerves for the final, killing blow. "You don't have to explain," I said quickly, wanting to get it over with. "I get it. It was a mistake. You were going through a lot. I should never have. It won't happen again. I'll be gone." "A mistake?" he repeated, and there was a strange inflection in his voice, a note of disbelief. "You think last night was a mistake?" He closed the remaining distance between us until he was standing right in front of me. He looked down at me, his gaze intense, searching. "Leo, the only mistake was me walking out of your room this morning without saying a word," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I've been going out of my mind all day. I was so scared. I thought I was the one who misread everything. I thought you were just being kind, and I took it somewhere else. I was terrified that I had freaked you out, that I'd ruined our friendship." I stared at him, my brain struggling to process his words. They did not compute. They were the opposite of the narrative I had been constructing all day. He had been scared. He thought he had ruined things. "But you're straight," I whispered, the words sounding foolish and small even to my own ears. It was the foundational belief upon which I had built years of self-denial. A wry, sad smile touched his lips. "I thought I was, too," he said softly. "For a long time. I was following the blueprint, remember? Playing the part one thought I was supposed to play. But it never felt right. Not really. There was always something missing." He took a deep breath, his eyes never leaving mine. "The reason it ended with Sarah, it wasn't just one thing. It was a lot of little things. It was me pulling away because I was feeling something I couldn't understand, something that scared the hell out of me. It was realizing that the person I wanted to talk to at the end of the day, the person whose opinion I valued most, the person I was most myself with, wasn't her." He paused, and his next words were a quiet revelation that unmade my entire world. "It was you, Leo. It's been you for a long, long time. I was just too afraid to see it." The air left my lungs in a rush. The fortress I had built around my heart did not just crumble. It was leveled, turned to dust, and blown away by the sheer, impossible force of his confession. All the years of silent yearning, of secret observation, of resigned acceptance that he was unattainable, it all coalesced into a single, blinding point of light. I started, but no words came out. My own confession was a huge, tangled knot in my throat. He must have seen it in my eyes, because the last of the tension left his shoulders. A look of profound relief washed over his face. He reached out, his hands coming up to cup my face, his thumbs gently stroking my cheekbones. "I have been in love with you for so long, Julian." I finally managed to say, the words a choked whisper. "I thought I was going to have to hide it forever." "You don't have to hide anything anymore," he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. And then he kissed me again. This kiss was nothing like the first. It was not tentative, not questioning. It was a confirmation. It was sure and deep and hungry, a release of years of unspoken feelings from both of us. It was the desperate, breathless kiss of two people who had found their way home after being lost for a very long time. It was the sound of my old life ending and a new one, a terrifying and beautiful and chaotic new one, finally beginning. It was forgiveness and acceptance and a promise, all without a single word. It was everything. The first few days of our new beginning felt like learning to walk again. The apartment, which had been a landscape of grief and then unbearable tension, transformed into a sanctuary. The air, once thick with unspoken words, was now light and filled with a quiet, joyful energy. We were still roommates, still best friends, but we were now also something more, something undefined and precious that we were carefully, tentatively exploring. Our first date happened on the couch, the very piece of furniture that had been the site of so much misery. We ordered pizza, just as we had during the storm, but this time, we talked. We really talked. He told me about the slow, dawning realization that his feelings for me were more than platonic, about the guilt he felt towards Sarah for not being honest with himself sooner. I told him about my museum of secret moments, about watching him from afar, convinced he was a world away from me. We laid our secrets bare, turning them over in the soft lamplight, and found that they were not ugly or shameful, but were simply the hidden parts of our shared story. The intimacy between us deepened in small, quiet moments. It was Julian's hand finding mine as we watched a movie, his fingers lacing through mine with a casual certainty that still made my heart skip a beat. It was waking up in the middle of the night and finding myself curled against his back, his warmth a solid, reassuring presence. It was waking up in the morning, by choice, in the same bed, and seeing his face, relaxed in sleep, on the pillow next to mine. This was the domestic, mundane magic I had never dared to dream of. It was the quiet hum of our lives, once parallel, now interwoven into a single, harmonious chord. We learned the new topography of our relationship. The feel of his hand on the small of my back as he passed me in the kitchen. The sound of his real laugh, unburdened by grief or confusion, a rich, warm rumble that made me feel safe. He discovered my particular brand of anxiety, and instead of dismissing it, he would ground me, his steady presence a balm to my overthinking mind. I learned about the cracks in his confident exterior, the insecurities he kept hidden behind his easy smile, and I felt a fierce, tender need to protect him from them. One evening, we were getting ready for bed, and I was feeling a familiar, low-level hum of anxiety about something work-related. He saw it on my face. He came over, wrapped his arms around me from behind, and rested his chin on my shoulder. "You're overthinking again," he murmured into my ear, his voice a warm vibration against my skin. "The blueprint is fine. The foundation is solid." I leaned back against his chest, a real, genuine smile spreading across my face. It was our first callback, the first inside joke forged from the wreckage of our past. We were taking the painful pieces of our journey and repurposing them, turning them into the foundation stones of our new life. "Are you sure?" I teased gently. "Maybe we should double-check the measurements." "I'm sure," he said, his arms tightening around me. "All the lines are straight now." Later that night, I lay awake long after he had fallen asleep, his deep, even breaths a comforting rhythm beside me. The rain had started again, a soft, gentle patter against the window, a soothing echo of the storm that had brought us together. I looked at his face in the dim moonlight, the strong line of his jaw, the dark sweep of his eyelashes against his cheek. The sight of him, so peaceful and so close, filled me with a sense of calm so profound it felt like settling into myself for the first time. For so many years, my life had been about control. It was about building walls, maintaining order, and keeping the chaos of my own feelings at a safe, manageable distance. I had equated that sterile quiet with peace. I had mistaken loneliness for safety. I thought that by observing life from behind glass, I could protect myself from the pain of wanting what I could not have. But I was wrong. True peace was not the absence of chaos. It was finding an anchor in the midst of it. It was the terrifying, exhilarating vulnerability of tearing down your own walls and letting someone else in. It was the risk of reaching out in the dark and feeling a hand reach back. The love I felt for Julian was not orderly or predictable. It had dismantled my life, broken all my rules, and thrown my world into a beautiful, brilliant disarray. And in the ruins of my old, quiet fortress, we were building something new, something stronger, something real. I reached out and gently brushed a stray curl of hair off his forehead. He stirred in his sleep, a soft murmur, and shifted closer, his arm coming to rest around my waist. He belonged here. I belonged here. This was not a dream. This was home. And it was a home built not on perfect lines and right angles, but on the messy, unpredictable, and miraculous resilience of a broken heart. Or two.